question, why have there been no great women artists, is the title of a seminal essay by the feminist American art historian Linda Nochlin, and it was first published in 1971. And she explores, in that essay, she explores the institutional rather than the personal barriers that have prevented women artists from succeeding. And I'd like to wrap her question around my presentation of Kauffman's life and career, ending with a scandal. So it's worth waiting to the end, I think. Okay. There's something up the top there that's kind of hiding part of the screen. I hope you can see it all right. So Nochlin's main premise was that women's art had always been judged from a male perspective. And I'm going to just point out some of the institutional hurdles that she identifies that are relevant in Kauffman's case. Women artists were regarded as dilettantes, as amateurs. It was acceptable for them to paint still life or flowers, but even female portraitors scandalized the establishment. And in fact, Alexander Pope, who of course was Lord Mansfield's mentor, for example, deemed it immodest and unseemly for women to gaze into men's eyes. A bit difficult to do a portrait if you can't look at their eyes. The law gave husbands the power to dispose of their wives' fortunes. Another barrier was that women were not allowed into the life class and were banned from drawing the male nude. Their achievements were underestimated, and history overwrote really their achievements. And then finally, if they did manage to become successful, women artists were lampooned and satirized. And we'll come back to these 6 barriers at the end of the presentation, but perhaps keep them in mind in relation to Kauffman. Regardless of gender, Angelica Kauffman was one of the most successful and internationally celebrated artists of the 18th century, and I think she would have thrived in the 21st century too, embracing new technologies as she did. And I think she would have loved social media, she would have loved these chat rooms. Her achievement was not only as an artist, but also as an entrepreneur. Like many successful artists today, she cashed in on her popularity and oversaw the marketing of a distinct Kauffman brand of merchandise. Hers was a unique combination of artistic talent with business acumen, and interestingly, the dualism of her professional success is embedded in her name itself. So you have Miss Angel, which was the affectionate name that her mentor, Sir Joshua Reynolds, first president of the Royal Academy, gave her, and that denotes her artistic talent, while her alter ego is Miss Kauffmann, which is German for merchandiser, trader, seller, and represents her business acumen. It's particularly appropriate because she retained her maiden name throughout her life, through 2 marriages. Kauffman is unique in the collection at Kenwood House. Women are very well represented on the walls of Kenwood House, but passively as muses and sitters, not as makers. Angelica Kauffman is the only female artist in the Ivy bequest. In fact, Kauffman's paintings were not part of the original 1928 bequest, but later acquisitions presented to Kenwood House in 1955 by the National Art Collections Fund, which is now known as the Art Fund, because of her special connection with the house. And we also have, as well as the paintings, have 2 stipple engravings of her designs in the green room. So her early life, she was born in 1741. She was a child prodigy. She was born in Switzerland and raised in Austria of a Swiss mother, Cleophilus, and an Austrian father, Johann Joseph Kauffmann. And this is her portrait of her father, beautiful portrait of her father. He was a minor itinerant ecclesiastical mural painter and a minor portraitist. So mother died when she was 15, and she traveled widely through Austria and then through Italy with her father, learning and soon surpassing his skills. By the age of 12, when this self-portrait in pastels was made, she was already getting portrait commissions from duchesses, archbishops, cardinals, diplomats. So her fame spread, and as they traveled through Austria and then through Italy, and they finally reached Venice, where the wife of the British ambassador, Lady Wentworth, invited Angelica to stay with her in London. So she arrived in London in 1766, age 25, already very much a celebrity, and she remained here for 15 years. The year after she arrived, she made a disastrous clandestine marriage to a fortune, you wouldn't believe this, a fortune-hunting impostor who claimed to be a Swedish count, Count Frederick de Horn. They lived apart and separated the following year. She was eventually granted a papal annulment 11 years later. Fortunately, I don't quite know how, her reputation survived the scandal, possibly because she was known for her unworldliness and sweet character and charm, but probably more importantly because de Horn, it was whispered that he was not only an impostor and a bigamist, but also that he was impotent. It wasn't until after the death of de Horn that she remarried. This was in London in 1781 to an older man. Here he is. This is her painting of her second husband in the year of their marriage. He was older, he was 55, she was 39, and he was a friend of her father's, a Venetian painter, as you all very well know, Antonio Zucchi, hence the gift of her paintings to Kenwood House. Unfortunately, there's no evidence to support the very lovely notion that they met and fell in love at Kenwood, but I'm sure she must have visited because the work was going on in the house by Zucchi and Robert Adam during her time in London. A few months after the marriage, for various reasons that unfortunately I haven't got time to go into now, they returned to Italy for good. Exceptionally for that time, Kauffman retained her maiden name through both marriages. She was never Mrs. Zucchi. And she retained full control of her not inconsiderable wealth through prenup marriage contracts in both cases. She was estimated to have made about £14,000 during her period in London, which today's money equates to about £1.75 million. Zucchi's marriage contract stated that he was not to intermeddle in her affairs. So let's look at her career in a little bit more detail. In 1768, only 2 years after arriving in London, she became one of only 2 women founding members of the Royal Academy at the age of 27. Now, this was a huge achievement, as the next full female member of the Royal Academy wouldn't be until 1936, Dame Laura Knight. That's 168 years later, if my maths is right. The Royal Academy, as you can see from Johann Zoffany's painting of 1771 of the 34 founding male members, was very much a boys' club, and women were not allowed in the life room, which is where the academicians are gathered. You can see there's one naked male model there and another here. Sir Joshua Reynolds is in the center with his ear trumpet. And Zoffany is over there in the corner with his palette in the act of painting, making the painting. And I'm going to point out one other academician for now, which is this man. His name is Richard Cosway, and he was a miniaturist. And we do have a couple of his miniature portraits up in the miniatures room at Kenwood, so worth having a look. But note that his cane is plonked right in the middle of a marble female torso in a gesture of male domination and confidence. But where are the 2 female academicians? Well, the female body is not entirely absent from the room. Apart from that marble torso, we have the virtual presence of Angelica Kauffman there on the wall. Angelica Kauffman on the left, and Mary Moser, a flower painter, on the right. And Mary Moser's father is just below. That's her father. He was called George Michael Moser, and he's adjusting the pose of one of the models. Unlike Mary Moser, Kauffman challenged the notion of what female artists could paint. Although she was sought after as a portraitist, she was primarily a history painter. History painting being the most prestigious genre of painting and usually a male preserve. Unfortunately, history painting required the portrayal of full-length male figures in action. And so her dilemma was, as a woman, as we can see, she was banned from the life room. She was only allowed to study the male form in classical sculptures and paintings, if at all. And her reputation would be shattered if she showed too competent a grasp of male anatomy. So how to get around that skill gap? Well, we have good examples of her strategy at Kenwood House. Firstly, it was to focus on the female heroines of classical and British myth. You've got Rinaldo and Arminda here from an epic poem by Tasso, and I'm not going to go into the painting, just to say that it's a really good example of female power and male submission. And then and these were both painted during her time in London. And then we have its counterpart, Galtieris and Griselda, from the Decameron by Boccaccio, which is more conventionally a scene of male power and female submission. So that was the first strategy, but also her second strategy, as demonstrated by the artist in the character of design listening to the inspiration of poetry, was to use female figures as allegorical figures. And here, through allegory, she's turned what is in effect a double portrait, a self-portrait and a portrait, into history painting. Poetry, by the way, is represented by her friend and protege and fellow artist, Maria Cosway, whose husband we've just seen in the Royal Academy life class with his cane planted on that marble torso. So her fame as an artist spread, although she had many detractors, and I'm going to go back to this one, who satirized her feminized male figures as being graceful rather than virile, looking like men in disguise. This is one of the obstacles that I mentioned, women's achievements being underestimated. As I said, she cashed in on this popularity through merchandising. Her paintings were reproduced as prints and engravings, and we have two examples at Kenwood. They were also reproduced on carriages, walls, ceilings, furniture, on porcelain, and this is a plate I saw in the art gallery in Swansea last summer, and it's actually a reproduction of our Kenwood painting, which is lovely. On fans, even on dresses. In fact, she inspired a cult of personality, and her work was so ubiquitous that one contemporary commentator said the whole world is Angelica mad. Showing you here on this slide my two Kauffman pieces. I have a lovely little print of three young people playing blind man's buff by Kauffman, dated, oh, what's the date on that? 1783. So it's actually after she left, but I think the design was done before that. And then this little pot, which I think is possibly the Judgment of Paris. I think that's Paris and Muse of the Three Graces. I'm not sure. There's no documentation with that. But we've got another very important example of the way successful women artists were treated with Cupid bound by the Graces. This is a mechanical painting, as I'm sure you know. It was a new technique invented by the printer Matthew Bolton, where existing designs, existing paintings were hand finished engravings of them were hand finished to look like oil paintings, finished by a skilled painter, but not by Kauffman herself, and then varnished and used in decorative schemes. Now, Angelica Kauffman was one of the very few artists to make use of this new process, and Bolton commissioned her to do 30 designs. For centuries, as a result of this, Kauffman was dismissed by the art establishment as merely a decorative painter, someone who, like her husband, did interior designs for Robert Adam. But recent research has revealed that many of her interior designs were actually mechanical paintings like this, in fact, that went undetected for centuries, really. And it's a telling example of how women artists' achievement has been underestimated and overwritten by history. Now I'm going to go back to these 6 barriers again and look at how they apply in Kauffman's life. So the few successful women artists who made it to professional status, like Artemisia Gentileschi, Elizabeth Vigée-Lebrun, Sofonisba Aguisola, and of course Kauffman and Mary Moser, all had one thing in common. They were all from art families. Their fathers were artists. Kauffman made many acclaimed self-portraits and portraits. She made about 25 self-portraits. Portraits not only of women, but also of her male contemporaries, including of Sir Joshua Reynolds, Goethe, David Garrick, and, as we've seen, Antonio Zucchi too. Exceptionally, we know Kauffman maintained control of her earnings through prenup contracts and kept her maiden name throughout her life. She worked around this ban, as we've seen, but also she played with gender fluidity and cross-dressing with scenes from Shakespeare and so on. The fact that her mechanical paintings were assumed by history to be the main body of her work is a clear example of achievements being overwritten. And then I'd like to end with a scandalous example of how successful women artists were lampooned and satirized, and this was experienced by Kauffman herself during the period that she was in London. We go back to the academicians. Her troll was Nathaniel Hone. He's there, look, in the painting, leaning on a blank canvas in Zoffany's painting. This is Hone's painted sketch for The Conjurer, which can be seen in Tate Britain. It caused one of the greatest scandals of the British art world in the 18th century. Hone submitted the finished painting to the Royal Academy's annual exhibition in 1775, but the academicians were outraged and it was refused on the grounds that it was offensive to one of its members, which, well, Angelica Kauffman, of course. Hone was a very proud and vindictive man, apparently jealous because Reynolds and Kauffman had both been invited to make decorations for St. Paul's Cathedral, which you can see in the background there, and Hone had not. The painting depicts Reynolds as the conjurer, and quite disrespectfully, Hone used one of Reynolds' studio models, an old beggar called George White, as the model for the president. And he's kindling a fire with Old Master Prince, which is a kind of snide reference to the fact that Reynolds referred to used old masters, borrowed from the old masters in his work. And leaning on his knee is a smiling young girl, his protege, Angelica Kauffman, allegedly a former lover of his. Dancing in front of the cathedral, and I'm going to zoom in so you can see that properly. Here it comes, are a group of naked artists waving palettes and paintbrushes in the air. And in their midst, a naked woman with long hair wearing only her black stockings. Kauffman. This is the finished painting, because the one in Tate Britain, sorry, is just a sketch. Following the scandal, Hone repainted the section in front of St. Paul's, and I'm going to show that to you in close-up, replacing the naked artist with a group of respectably dressed men around a table. The finished painting is now in the National Gallery of Ireland, Dublin. And the whole title of it is The Pictorial Conjurer Displaying the Whole Art of Optical Deception. Although the conjurer did create a huge scandal at the time, it failed to do lasting damage to either of Hone's intended victims. And while Hone is largely forgotten, Angelica Kauffman's star continues to rise with renewed interest in her work, and she's now regarded as one of the leading artistic talents of her day. And before the crisis, the corona crisis, unfortunately, there were two major exhibitions, one in Dusseldorf, and then it was going to transfer to the Royal Academy in London.